Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep Series 9 and Week 70 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, last week we finished the fifth of 5 weeks on letters 211 and 212 to Rona Bear, answering a lot of questions, but in fairness, generating a few more that have gone unanswered. Today, we move on in the letters to one that's new in the revised and expanded edition. It's letter 212a, written to Tolkien's first cousin, Marjorie Inkledon. Now, Marjorie's mother, May Inkledon, and Tolkien's mother, Mabel, were sisters. Marjorie and Tolkien were themselves just a year apart in age. So as he's writing this letter in October of 1958, he is 66 and Marjorie is 67. He begins with, what else at that age? Retirement plans. I have at last decided not to move when I retire. Now, at this time, he and Edith have lived at 76 Sandfield Road in Headington for more than 5 years. He continues, I have had to have some alterations made in the little villa to provide a small room for my most useful books when I have to leave Merton. He will be retiring from his position as professor of the Merton Chair of English Language and Literature next year. He continues listing the changes that he's had to make to the house. To provide moderate convenience downstairs, since Edith cannot manage stairs without pain, and urgently to provide a room for J.A. J.A. is Joan Ann, their granddaughter, that's son Michael's daughter, who's now 13. And like any of us who've ever had to get work done on our homes, well, Tolkien has some things to say. Everything, in spite of careful plans, has gone wrong. The interior work was under contract to be finished by Monday, October 6th, while we were away. It's now October 23rd as he's writing this. And I employed a supervisor to supervise. But the supervisor didn't supervise, and the builders didn't build, and the plumbers didn't plumb. The gas men gassed, and the rest smoked in the ruins like hobbits. I feel your pain, Professor. He then talks about a rough trip that he'd recently had to Ireland. He was the external examiner for the National University of Ireland, which then, if my sources are correct, had colleges in Cork, Galway, Maynooth, and Dublin. The journey began in difficulty as he tells Marjorie it began with a tempest on the night of September 24th and ended with being carried to the boat in Dublin, doubled up with lumbago at 8 p.m. on October 6th. Lumbago being an outdated term for what we would call today lower back pain. But wait until the end of the letter for his medical advice. Anyway, that's a long and difficult trip of almost 2 weeks. And then he writes, I arrived home after about 1,400 miles to find complete chaos. Edith arrived 2 hours later while I was burning up the telephone wires. For days, we had only an electric kettle for cooking apparatus and the bathroom to wash up in. I'm a good 10 years younger than Tolkien was when he wrote this, but this is becoming eerily familiar. Breaking my collarbone after having an epidural for back pain, traveling and then coming home to a kitchen in tatters for 5 weeks. But as challenging as my own circumstances might have been in the fall of 23, this is a lot harder. And it's especially hard on Edith, as Tolkien writes. Very quickly, all the good that her rest in Bournemouth had done was undone, though it cost half my earnings in Ireland. Edith has indeed been very poorly, with paint stinks and hammering to cheer her on. But we seem at last, if not out of the wood, to see a light through the trees. Sometimes, Professor, that light through the trees is just an oncoming train. Hopefully, he says, she'll be going to visit their son John the following week. Now, after that, the letter takes a necessarily somber tone as Tolkien expresses his condolences to Marjorie on the death of a friend of hers. He observes with what can only be said to be hard-earned wisdom, I expect you found your part very grievous, really. Whatever hopes we have and whatever phrases we like to use, death is an ordeal and unnatural for the children of God. He then speaks of another death that has impacted him, but not before mentioning that a very large number of his older friends and lifelong acquaintances had died in the preceding year. This time, though, he says, I arrived back on the day of the funeral of Mrs. Wright, widow of the famous old Professor Joseph Wright, who was my patron as an undergrad and young man. But she was 95 and literally fell asleep, as tombstones often lyingly assert. To add to the little complications of my life, I am sole surviving trustee of her husband's estate and an executor of her personal will. That can be a very time-consuming and difficult job, and Tolkien acknowledges that great works do not flourish under such conditions. He concludes the letter, though, with some wonderful advice for those of us suffering from lower back pain. This must be all for the present. I hope it finds you in the pink, that is in good health, as it leaves me, to end in a smart and soldierly manner. Oddly enough, my pinkness is a fact at present. 3 good wallops of Irish whiskey soon mitigated the lumbago, and I was upright before we sailed. Sufferers, please note. Sufferers, please note. For now, this wraps up this week's Tolkien Tuesday. Be sure to join me again next week when Tolkien reluctantly provides facts about himself in a letter to a biographer. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what I talk about. You can also support the show, get an ad-free feed, and a bonus episode every week. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, by now, you've heard that soon the Prancing Pony podcast will be back on YouTube, and that I'll be starting my new streaming show, the Prancing Pony Podcast Plays. Now, all of that is going to be combined in one place on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe here and tune in. Now, the name of this channel will change, but if you're already subscribed, you won't need to do a thing. Now, with all 4 of these projects going, I've decided I need to consolidate social media as well as YouTube. So be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.